I think God might have a faithful scale. When He returns, all of us will be placed on that scale, waiting to see if our lives tip the scale. For some, the scale will tip on the first try. For others, we will be passed on to the next scale, where we will finally tip on the negligent level.
Welcome to the Parable Podcast. Thanks for joining Family Life on-air host Randy Snavely as he digs into the story lessons taught by the world's greatest teacher, Jesus.
In this episode, it's part 2 of Will You Be Fired? The Parable of the 10 Minas, taken from Luke chapter 19, verses 11 to 27.
The nobleman owns it all, but he has given his servants a little bit of it, and he tells them to make money. He doesn't tell them how to make money, so he gives them the freedom to do it in any way they can. The Lord gives us that same kind of freedom. Invest everything I've given you to bring in returns to Christ. Peter Bradstreet spoke at my father's memorial service, and one of the things Pete said that I remember was about a conversation he had with my dad. He asked, "Where do you put your investments?" And my dad answered, "I invest in my kids." Dad has 4 kids who are all living for Christ. In his book, Found God's Will, Dr. John MacArthur asks if you want to know what God's will is for your life. And then he tells us, be saved, be spirit-filled, be sanctified, be submissive, and be willing to suffer. After that, do whatever you want. You have the freedom in how you invest what He's given you. Pastor Darrell Dash said, "We have one job to do until Jesus comes back, and that is to faithfully invest everything He has given us and to make a profit with it for Him." I direct the local high school musical, and before all 3 shows last year, our 2 leads, who were both believers, Seth and Gracie, announced to their classmates, "We're going to have a prayer meeting before we go out on stage. Anyone who wants to join us, feel free." I'm guessing around 15 others joined them the first night. Maybe 20 did on the second night. The last day, the whole cast gathered around as Seth prayed. And in his prayer, he prayed the whole plan of salvation. I was sitting there silently urging him on. "You go, Seth, you go." They took their singing and acting abilities and invested them for God. Now, when God tells us to do business, there are 2 ways in which His servants can respond. But before we get to the servants, we first meet His enemies. Verse 14 tells us His citizens hated Him. Here is evidence, again, that all of us, whether we follow Christ or not, all of us belong to Him. His citizens hated Him. You may reject Christ, but He still owns you. Atheist, owned. Buddhist, owned. Muslims, owned. By virtue of creation, God owns all of us. This group that hates the nobleman do not have a good outcome. If you look at verse 27, "But as for these enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slaughter them before me." You cannot be neutral on the subject of Jesus. He offers forgiveness to all, but if it is rejected, the consequences are severe. The faithful servants are commended by the nobleman. "Well done, good servant. Because you have been faithful in very little, you shall have authority over 10 cities. Same thing with the next guy. His profit wasn't as great, so his reward wasn't as great, but he still got rewarded 5 cities. What Jesus is teaching here is when He returns, He's going to judge how faithful we have been with what He has given us. Those found faithful will be rewarded generously. Spurgeon said, "Jesus has made us kings and priests, and we are in training for our thrones. If we are faithful here, we may expect our master to entrust us with higher service hereafter. You are listening to part 2 of Family Life's Parable podcast, Will You Be Fired? It's taken from Luke 19, verses 11 through 27. The second servant kind of scares me, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But look at verses 20 and 21. Then another came, saying, Lord, here is your mina, which I kept laid away in a handkerchief. For I was afraid of you, because you are a severe man. You take what you did not deposit, and reap what you did not sow. So this guy played it safe, and in doing so, he disobeyed his master's command to engage in business. His fear paralyzed him from doing anything with the gift given him. He ended up burying it. He was a hearer of the word, but not a doer of it. This is the person who goes to church every Sunday. He makes sure his kids are in Sunday school. This is the person who is always at the right events or gatherings, but is content to let somebody else do what needs to be done. It is possible to look like a faithful servant and not be one. This second servant is negligent in his service. He takes what God has given him and either uses it for himself or buries it. When the nobleman finds out this servant has failed to do business for him, he has harsh words for him. Verse 22, I will condemn you with your own words, you wicked servant. You know that I was a severe man, taking what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not put my money in the bank, and at my coming I might have collected it with interest? And he said to those who stood by, Take the mina from him, and give it to the one who has 10 minas. And they said to him, Lord, he has 10 minas. I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. He's like the coach or the manager who just got fired. He didn't produce. You know, when eggs are sorted, they are placed on a conveyor belt and go to a scale where they are weighed. If the egg is heavy enough, it goes down a chute. If it's not heavy enough, it stays on the conveyor to the next scale where it's weighed again. That's how we get extra large, large, and medium eggs. What's interesting about this, the eggs are not measured by size. They are measured by weight. An extra large egg does not mean that the shell is large. It means that the insides are large. Each egg is weighed and sorted according to its substance, not just its looks. An egg that looks extra large may end up being a medium. I think God might have a faithful scale. When he returns, all of us will be placed on that scale, waiting to see if our lives tip the scale. For some, the scale will tip on the first try. For others, we will be passed on to the next scale, where we will finally tip on the negligent level. Yes, a believer in Christ. Yes, someone who lived a good life. Someone who was not openly disobedient, but someone who lived primarily for themselves. Someone who did not invest what God had given them for God. When Christ returns, he will ask many, Why didn't you engage in business on my behalf while I was gone? Why did you take what was mine and use it for yourself? God is the owner. We are the stewards. David Platt said, This means every breath you breathe, the mind you have, every single thing you possess ultimately comes from God. And he has expectations for how your breath, your mind, and your possessions are to be used, which means we need to be focused. We are stewards. We must work diligently and responsibly with every single thing God's entrusted to us. We want to be faithful to do what He calls us to do with the resources He's given to us. We want to work wisely with everything we have: our time, talents, our mind, our money, everything.
This has been the Parable Podcast with Randy Snavely. Click the subscribe button so you'll know when new episodes are released. And be sure to check out Family Life's other original podcasts, including If That Makes Sense, Business by the Book, and Rise Up with Steve, Therese, and Tim. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Your partnership makes podcasts like this possible. Find out more at familylife.org.